Buddy and Tony here. In my last video, I made a review of Hey Arnold, and looking back at the rating that I gave it, I was sort of unfair to it, as I only gave it a 4.5 out of 5. So this time I decided to change the rating to a complete 5 out of 5, because you know what? The strengths more than outweigh the flaws of the show. Also, what's very interesting about the show's setting was that it's in Hillwood City, which is basically an amalgamation of 3 US states, namely Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, and Brooklyn, New York. Also, there were some dud episodes that I didn't really care for, and those were Arnold Betrays Iggy, which was the most infamous episode of Hey Arnold, which also was the most unfair episode as well because, well, when you think about it, Sid and Stinky could have gotten the blame for it, but instead Arnold took the blame, and then the rest of it was just rather sour, and it was just also one of Craig Bartlett's most hated episodes as well, that he thought it was the worst and should never be aired again. Then we have Girl Trouble, which was rather unfair to Arnold because even though Helga constantly harassed him, he still got the short end of the stick. And then with, what do you call this? The Bag of Money. Yeah, Bag of Money. We see Sid being a big jerk towards Arnold. So, with those out of the way, let's get on to the main list. My personal top 25 most favorite Hey Arnold episodes of all time. Coming in at number 25, we have Phoebe's Little Problem. Now, out of all the Phoebe-centered episodes that I like, which were Phoebe Cheats, which shows Phoebe's flaw of being envious and doing whatever she can just to win, even if it means cheating. Phoebe Breaks a Leg, even showing that she can be a manipulator. Phoebe Skips, which shows that she can be easily taken advantage of. And Phoebe Takes the Fall, in which even if Helga wants to win the championship, she has to consider that Phoebe has to take the fall for her in order to please her father and all that stuff. And it really does show that Phoebe is not just some Mary Sue, but she also has some flaws as well. And no more is it evident than with Phoebe's Little Problem. Now, the episode starts off well with Arnold saying that, yes, he has prune cookies for snacks, and they don't really like the taste of prune, except Phoebe, who says that prunes are actually beneficial for you and they contain a lot of vitamins, so she takes them willingly, eats them all up, something gassy happens in her stomach, and then as she receives her perfect attendance award, she ends up farting on the microphone, and she ends up being humiliated by a lot of her peers and classmates. Only for Arnold to take the responsibility of trying to tell Phoebe that, what just happened back then was just no big deal. And he tries to comfort her, to tell her that, well, it probably won't happen anymore, but it continues to happen even further. And then Phoebe feels rather ashamed of herself, so she decides to lock herself up in her house, only for Arnold to say that, if you can't face the class, how can you ever face the world? And it basically took a pep talk from Arnold to tell her that she can't just hide in her room all along. Sure, Gerald and Phoebe fans could have wanted Gerald to really let Phoebe come out, but I thought it was really great for Arnold to really, give the ultimate message, because I know I'm going to sound pretty biased, and I know that I'm going to have a lot of hate mail, but I actually liked the pairing between Arnold and Phoebe. I thought that Arnold's moments with Phoebe together was just really sweet, especially when he tries to comfort her. And they kind of make a pretty interesting couple. I mean, think about it. You have two sweet, very smart people, with Phoebe being a book-smart character and Arnold being like a socially adept and not just a very book-smart character, and both of them have their flaws. So it probably could have been very interesting to have Arnold and Phoebe as a couple. And yes, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail with Gerald Phoebe fans and Arnold Helga fans, but I can't help it. I really do see them as a potential couple, and they really are sweet together. And not to mention, this episode handles the topic of humiliation with such tact. The only downside to it was the kids there were pretty much jerkasses, especially Harold, who was pretty much obnoxious in this episode, though he did get his comeuppance. So overall, Phoebe's little problem, while not a very great episode to a lot of people, still manages to have something close to my heart because of its tactful use of the topic of humiliation, even though Harold was obnoxious, though he did get his comeuppance. Number 24, we have Downtown as Fruits, the very first episode of Hey Arnold, and one that has really introduced the show very well. Basically, Helga has a school musical play about the basic food groups. But one problem is that Arnold and Gerald are not present. They're basically roaming around the city, and they both have problems with Helga. So, they get themselves into a lot of hijinks, playing pool, and then getting themselves into a money laundering scheme, and then only for them to come back to school in their costumes, and then belting it all out in song with their fruit song. This was a definitely great start to what was going to be a great and colorful series. Number 23, we have The Journal, which showcases how Arnold came to be and Arnold's time with his parents. And not to mention the parents', Miles and Stella's, various adventures that they have together in San Lorenzo, which is a fictional South American country. They're basically not just adventurers, but Stella is also a nurse. And you get to see their exploitations together and the many journeys and trials and tribulations that they face together, especially when it involves the encounter of the green-eyed tribe. So it's a very interesting and very intriguing and very fun and very thrilling episode, but the only downside to it was its cliffhanger ending, which still left me very upset because it was an awesome episode. It had the potential to close out Hey Arnold with the Jungle movie, but the problem was it was never made. So ultimately, I was disappointed with the cliffhanger ending, but I still got a very thrilling and very awesome episode that really showcased the backstories of Miles and Stella as parents of Arnold. Then we have number 22, which is Crabby Author, which showcases that not all of your role models will end up being positive people, and it takes a lot of determination and heart to really see the best in them. No sooner is it evidenced when Arnold does a book report on one of his favorite authors of all time, Agatha Caulfield. And when he does decide to have an interview with her, we find out that Agatha is an angry, bitter, mean old woman who does not want any visitors in her house, and she lives on Elk Island. So day and night, Arnold traverses from the city to Elk Island just to meet Agatha Caulfield. And he does not give up. And we do see that she feels that the stories that she writes are nothing but lies and fabrications coming out from her mind, and she ends up being so cynical about them. But Arnold tells her that he's not going to give up, and he still believes in the power that her stories have on him because they mean well to him. And you can really see that. And the ending for this episode is probably one of the sweetest that I've ever got. So overall, Crabby Author was just a very interesting episode and a very, very great episode as well. And to showcase that not all of your role models in life will be guaranteed to be very nice people, and it will take a lot of heart and determination to really see the best in them. Number 21, we have The Pig War. A very thrilling, action-packed, and just a fun episode in which we get to see the reenactment of the pig war as done in Hillwood. Interestingly enough, there was a real-life pig war which happened in 1859, which involved the Americans and the British fighting over a territory, or a piece of territory in their land. In this version, Abner is basically used as the mascot, and well, Rex Smythe Higgins the first and Rex Smythe Higgins the third capture the pig, and they plan to roast it. Oh my goodness, it's rather heartless of them, but Rex Smythe Higgins III has a change of heart as Arnold and him help out to get the pig and retreat back home. And I thought it was just a very well executed episode. This episode has a lot of thrills, excitement, adventure, and some action as well. This is definitely an episode I could recommend to anyone who's like craving for some action in a show. And this is definitely very much a fun episode at that as well. And then we have number 20, Cool Jerk. Now, which is no surprise because Arnold is an only child. He has expressed his want to have an older brother in his life, and we get that in Cool Jerk, where we see a college dropout or even a high school dropout by the name of Frankie G coming in his motorcycle, telling Harold to stop trying to pound Arnold, and then they end up having a lot of merry adventures together. Well, basically Arnold and Frankie G. On the flip side, Arnold ends up skipping school and basically ends up alienating Gerald as his best friend, even though Arnold ends up being the coolest kid in school after hanging out with Frankie G. Only to find out that Gerald has also had a conversation with Fuzzy Slippers that, well, Arnold has basically hanging out with the wrong guy. Frankie G is total bad news, and he basically found out the hard way as Frankie G and his goons tell Arnold to rob an electronics store. And yeah, it was rather sad that Frankie G had to run and abandon his quote-unquote friend, but at least Gerald was there to stick by him through use of a cop siren that he had from his grandparents' attic, and they basically reconcile. So overall, it does see that Arnold does have flaws, especially of evidence in the first season, and that he is still a kid, impressionable, and, still in need of a good role model in his life. And this episode does it really well. And then, number 19, we have Arnold's Thanksgiving, a very touching Thanksgiving episode, which also shows that, yes, Arnold's and Helga's families are pretty much dysfunctional. Arnold's grandparents and fellow boarders constantly having riots, and Grandma Gertie saying that Thanksgiving is almost like the 4th of July, and Helga's family, well, that of her parents and Olga, constantly not minding Helga and stating that, they end up running out of their houses only to meet each other by fate. And then they meet Mr. Simmons, whose family is not any better. But still, this episode shows how thankful we should be for the family that we have in Thanksgiving, and that Thanksgiving is not just about the turkey and the decorations and all that stuff, but it also means family and friends getting together and having something to be very thankful for. Then we have number 18, which is Olga Comes Home. This is also the debut episode of one Olga Pataki, Helga's older sister. And she comes home very happy to see her parents. Her parents are happy to see her. Helga is still kind of angry that her parents are not even giving attention to her, and her parents are giving all the attention to Olga. And then when Olga's grades come in from Princeton University, she's a straight-A student. Helga couldn't believe her eyes. Her jealousy gets fueled, and it drives her to put a B+ on one of Olga's subjects. This causes Olga to break down in tears and lock herself up in her room, only for Helga to gloat, and then only for her to say that, yeah, Olga is not worth it anymore. And then when Helga has a dream of Arnold telling her that she has to do the right thing, Helga confesses, and Olga says that, I would have loved to tell our parents about it, but I choose not to. And yeah, Olga does say that it was a pretty mean thing for Helga to do, and probably the parents could have been notified about that, and Helga would have ended up being punished. but she decided just to keep it between the both of them. And even Olga herself states that it's even so tiresome to be constantly putting on this act of her being the star child, the perfect one in the family. And she even says that she finds that she's constantly being a wound-up doll in her parents' eyes. So meaning that there is something going on not only just between Olga, but also between her parents as well. And yeah, her characterization in the later episodes have been flanderized as just the typical preppy, over-emotional young woman. But in this episode, I thought it was really a great episode. It really shows that Olga can be a complex character and a very fascinating character as well. Yes, Helga is extremely fascinating, but Olga can be fascinating as well. She does state that, yeah, she is pretty much tired of being treated like a doll all the time, and sometimes she wants to have a breather, and she feels that Helga is, or should be thankful that at least she is not always noticed around the house, and sometimes Helga also has a better understanding of her older sister, which also leads them to a very sweet ending of them bonding together. So overall, this was definitely a great debut episode for Olga, but I was kind of disappointed that the writers flanderized her character, which is really sad because, like I said, Olga is a very intriguing character once you give her the right material, and this is definitely the best material that I've seen through her. Then we have number 17, Eugene, a very fun musical episode which basically stars one of the clumsiest kids in the entire cartoon, Eugene. And basically, Eugene is pretty much the star of the show as the play was meant for him. Yes, it does have Eugene's girlfriend Betty played by Lila and his rival Lawrence played by Arnold. But of course, the director decides that the ending should be changed because it has to be more realistic. Unfortunately, Arnold and Eugene don't like this idea and decide that the best thing they should do is keep the play's original ending, with Eugene coming out fine and getting the girl. So, yes, this is definitely a fun episode, and it's even made more fun with Helga constantly having hijinks ensue and trying to sabotage the play. So this is definitely a great underdog story, especially for Eugene. And we have number 16, Ghost Bride, which is a very thrilling and chilling and dark episode. Yes, there were some dark episodes as well that involved the supernatural, like Haunted Train, Wheeze and Ed, Headless Cabby, and Four-Eyed Jack. But this is freaking thrilling. We have Arnold, Gerald, Harold, Stinky, Sid, Eugene, Curly, and Helga going to a cemetery, and then Curly wants to tell the tale of the Ghost Bride, only to have Gerald tell the tale. And the tale goes like this. A young woman by the name of Cynthia Snell is supposed to be married to her, her will-to-be husband. But the will-to-be husband ended up being married to her sister in another chapel. So she plots her revenge by murdering the both of them with an axe. And then she ends up committing suicide by jumping out of the window. That's pretty dark, especially for a show primarily aimed towards kids. And then you have the tombstone being read, "Here lies Cynthia Snell. She lived her life and went straight to," and then we hear a drill. Presumably, she went to hell. So, this is definitely a thrilling, dark, and quite funny episode as well. As even Helga ends up being dressed up as the Ghost Bride, Curly ends up being dressed up as the Ghost Bride, and this also ends up being played out like a Twilight Zone episode. It's a very chilling and very thrilling episode, yet it's also a lot of fun to watch, and it's worth the rewatch. Number 15, we have School Play. In this episode, we see the 4th grade kids preparing for the annual school play in which they're going to be presenting Shakespeare's classic romance, Romeo and Juliet. And Arnold gets to play Romeo, and we have 4 candidates for Juliet: Rhonda, Sheena, Phoebe, and Lila. Helga wants to play the coveted part, so she ends up sabotaging their plans of ending up playing Juliet, and then she even gets to admit to Lila that, yes, she is in love with Arnold, and even Lila can be quite sneaky in this episode as well. Then the play begins, and let me just say that their interpretation of Romeo and Juliet was just a lot of fun to watch, especially with Helga really going all out with Juliet, and especially her death scene, and especially her kiss for Arnold's Romeo. I thought it was just a lot of fun. So overall, school play is a lot of fun to watch, and it's actually quite clever as well, and it's just a fun ride from beginning to end. Then we have number 14, which is New Teacher, the debut episode of one Mr. Simmons. Now, when we first see Mr. Simmons, we see him as this very sensitive, very sweet teacher who wants the best for his students. And his students don't really understand him, so they basically play pranks towards him, take advantage of his kindness, and he basically flees the school when he discovers that Harold has eaten his sandwich. And then we see another teacher by the name of Lieutenant Major Goose, and he's a lot stricter and meaner to the kids. The biggest highlight for me was seeing them do the multiplication table. You know, the one that goes, let's try it again. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 4 is 32. And then Mr. Goose says, I can't hear you. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 4 is 32. And then we see Helga's disgruntled face while they say it. And she's basically standing in the corner. And then they want Mr. Simmons back with their version of a truth crown, and Harold making his own sandwich to him, and then even Gerald having a sort of beatnik-like poem towards him. And then it ends with Lieutenant Major Goose running out of the school, and then Mr. Simmons deciding that a field trip would be very beneficial to his students. So this is definitely a great introduction to who has to be one of my most favorite male adult characters in Hey Arnold. It's without a doubt that Mr. Simmons is one of my most favorite male characters in not only Hey Arnold, but he also reminds me of Miss Keene from the Powerpuff Girls, of just how fatherly they can be with their students. And he's definitely a lot of fun to watch as well, and he's definitely a great role model as an adult. So overall, New Teacher was a great introductory episode to who has to be one of my most favorite male adult characters in Hey Arnold. And then number 13, we have a 3-way tie between Polishing Rhonda, Helga versus Big Patty, and Hey Harold. Now let's start off with Polishing Rhonda. Basically, this starts off with Rhonda and Patty having a spat with each other, and then they both have to go to finishing school in order to better their behaviors. Patty ends up doing well, but Rhonda not so much. So Patty decides to show her the ropes of becoming a real lady. And then they bond, and then Rhonda gets to be valedictorian, and then she kind of snubs Patty. But until then, Patty ends up being, bullied by this snooty girl. But when she wants to pound her, Rhonda steps in, admonishes the snooty girl, and then Patty and Rhonda bond together. And then we have Helga versus Big Patty, in which Helga makes a lot of snide and really mean comments about Patty, only for Patty to say that she's going to beat her at 3:15 tomorrow at the schoolyard. And then, Arnold intervenes and says that, the thing about Helga that they both understand is that Helga can seem mean on the outside, but deep down, she can be really nice and sweet. And that's what Patty also does see, especially when people see her as a person. And we do also get a stage combat between Helga and Patty. And even Patty says that, that Arnold kid of yours, he's pretty smart. And they have a moment of mutual respect for each other. And, basically, Helga ends up staging her defeat. Then we have Hey Harold, which also leads to another one of my most favorite couples in this show, or pretty much probably my most favorite couple in this show. The pairing between Harold and Patty. Now, when we first see Harold in this episode, we basically see him just wanting to be at Rhonda's party just for the food and for the drinks and all that. And then we see Patty very much lonely and wanting for some company. And then at first they get into a spat with each other until they decide to dance and bond. And then throughout their days, they end up bonding with each other and being friends, only to have Sid and Stinky constantly making mean comments about Patty, and then for Harold to come out with the most epic comeback line from him and saying that he's gonna pound them if they're gonna continue making fun of Patty behind her back. And he basically ends with sitting with Patty for lunch together. I thought it was just a very sweet episode between the both of them. So overall, these 3 episodes really exhibit who Patty is as a character. Yes, behind her backs, she's pretty much the bully, the tough chick, the one who has to pound someone if they insult her. But deep down, she's very intelligent, very articulate, and just a great character. And a very well-written character at that. So, it was just a very great experience really seeing Patty on screen. And then we have number 12 with Weighing Harold. Now this episode shows just how tough it is to really be healthy and to really lose weight, not just to look good, but to stay healthy. Basically, Harold has issues with his weight and is constantly being talked about it behind his back. And until he sees a TV ad, an infomercial saying that there's a cruise ship that can help him lose weight. So he gets on the cruise ship, but he ends up gaining more weight. And it takes some motivational help from Arnold to really lose all the weight. And coming from someone who's dealt with weight problems myself, I could see it really hit home well with me. It's never easy trying to lose weight just to look good or even just be healthy. But it takes a lot of motivation and a lot of perseverance to really get to that goal, which this episode really demonstrates as very well and very well executedly. And then we have number 11, which is the Beeper Queen. Now, this episode exhibits the relationship between Helga and her mom. The first being Road Trip, which was actually a pretty good episode, but nowhere does it come close to the Beeper Queen. And then we get to see that Big Bob ended up having a sort of, a very excruciating injury due to an accident, so Miriam has to take over. At first, he was not so sure if Miriam was going to take over well in his job, but she proves him wrong with flying colors. And she manages to be a strong and very capable mom towards Helga. But unfortunately, as work and the stress of work manages to take its toll, she stops feeding Helga, she stops being there for her, and then she's more concentrated on her work. Only then does it take a playback in one of the takes does she see the errors in her ways. And we get to see that Miriam apologizes to Helga and says that she'll stay strong as a mom to her no matter what. So this basically is a really heartwarming and really heart-wrenching episode as well, because the thing about Miriam is that what makes her interesting as a character, aside from her being an alcoholic, or rather a subtle alcoholic in some cases, is that she is basically a victim of, verbal abuse by her husband. We get those instances, like once upon a time, she also stated that she used to be a rodeo champion, and even that of a world-class swimmer. Unfortunately, because of her marriage towards Bob and how he ends up being the chief of the house, these things didn't happen. So she has to basically end up living under his roof. Only then, with episodes like Road Trip and Beeper Queen, does she prove herself to be more capable than she already is, and really shows her that she can be strong given the situations. And we really wanted to see more of her because what we've seen through Miriam was that she ends up being constantly bored, sleepy, droopy, unmotivated, and all that stuff. But the thing is, it's mostly because of Big Bob. He ends up trying to impose his life on her, and she basically feels that her own life is just how he wants it. So with her, seeing her shine in the Beeper Queen, I thought was just a very wonderful example of how she can be a strong mom to Helga, especially being a beneficial mom to Helga given the circumstances and given the chance. So overall, the Beeper Queen is pretty much one of the best Miriam-related episodes that I've seen in this show, as it really shows the strength that she has between the relationship between Helga and her mom. Well, this is pretty much part one of my top 25 Hey Arnold episodes. So this is pretty much entries 25 to 11. Tune in later where I'll talk about the top 10 favorite episodes of this show. So until then, see you later, everybody.